Welcome. I'm glad you could be with us today. I'm Professor Jacob Goodson, Assistant Professor of Philosophy here at Southwestern. I want to say thank you to Daleen McDonald for making it possible for us to have this event in the library today. I have 3 different classes that all can and should be here. And if you're a member of one of those classes, the sign-in sheet is right in the middle on one of those bookcases. So feel free to sign in order to get your extra credit for being here today. It is my distinct honor to introduce our speaker. Lindsey Graber is a philosophy and religion major at Southwestern College. She is a junior from Wichita, Kansas. Lindsey is a remarkable student. She started taking philosophy classes just last year, spring 2014, and already, within a year, she has taught a class for me on Nietzsche's view of courage. She has written 3 remarkable papers, and she's also presented at a philosophy conference at the University of Central Oklahoma. She did that back in February, presented the paper that you're going to hear today. The response she received that day at UCO was very disappointing, so I have high expectations that us Kansans can provide a better response to Lindsey than those Okies could. Thank you. I never get laughs, so thank you. Can you come to all my classes? So, Lindsey's topic is very important. Friedrich Nietzsche is one of the most controversial philosophers still today. Yesterday in History of Philosophy, I introduced the students to Nietzsche, and it always gets a wide range of reactions. Whether or not you agree or disagree with Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy, he is an important person to confront, engage with, and to figure out what you think, where he's wrong, and if he's wrong. Lindsey Graber has done those tasks, and you're going to hear her think out loud and read from her paper how she's made her peace with Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy. And this also contributes a great amount to the theme on courage that we're looking at and examining this year on campus. So again, I want to help me welcome Lindsey Graber.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you all, and I will try to project and speak loudly for those of you sitting in the back that you can hear me. And please, if you have any questions, I would love to take them. So as you think of questions, like hold on to them, and ask me after this. The need and desire to be seen as valuable is an inherent human trait. No one wants to feel unloved, invaluable, or unworthy. The search for meaning and purpose in life is a universal trait that everyone carries. Knowing that one has the ability to be courageous allows a person to be confident through tough and uncomfortable situations. In the search for meaning, often there are uneven splits of worthiness. Rich, poor, master, slave, beautiful, ugly, courageous, cowardice. These are splits that leave the person on the undesired side feeling undeserving of honor and dignity. A particular divide that has been constant throughout history is male-female. One side is seen as strong, superior, active, and dominant, and the other side is seen as weak, inferior, passive, and meek. Within Christian theology, the fall of humanity becomes inextricably connected to females. In congruence with Christian theology, this divide between male and female remains perpetuated by the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Throughout his writings, he claims that women are unable to be noble. Within his philosophy, only noble humans can be virtuous or courageous. If only males can be noble, then only males can be virtuous and courageous. Nobility is needed in both genders in order to begin to close the gap between men and women. By returning to the story of Adam and Eve, we find a way for women to stand courageously and be noble. Born on October 15, 1844, in Prussian Saxony, Nietzsche was only 5 years old when his father passed away. According to Thomas Albert Howard, author of Friedrich Nietzsche, Religion and America, Nietzsche descended from a long line of Lutheran ministers on both sides of his family, and it was expected that he too would pursue a vocation in the ministry. Nietzsche was dedicated to the path of ministry until he attended gymnasium at Scafolta, where he began to have uncertainties about his faith. These doubts became stronger after attending the University of Bonn, where he majored in both philology and theology. At the age of 24, Nietzsche became a full-time professor of classic philology at the University of Basel in Switzerland, where he taught for 10 years before retiring due to his diminishing health. From 1879 to 1889, Nietzsche continued to publish books. He suffered from a mental breakdown in 1889 in Turin, Italy, that left him in completely dependent upon the care of his mother and sister. Nietzsche passed away on August 25, 1900. History is filled with rich philosophers and theorists, but very few are women. Often females are looked down upon as the weaker sex. Nietzsche is an influential philosopher that views women as delicate and weak. A female's ability to be virtuous, noble, or courageous is next to impossible. To paraphrase, women are like birds that need to be caged up. Nietzsche connects nobility to virtue. Only a noble person can be virtuous. If women cannot be noble, they cannot display the noble virtues of courage, insight, sympathy, and solitude. In order to be noble, a person cannot be trapped in the old world relationship characterized by a master and a slave. Master morality is the morality of the strong-willed. Masters are the measure of all things. They alone determine what is good. Slaves revalue what their masters value. They are servants submitting to the will and command of the master. Nobility requires a person to break free from the master-slave relationship. Nietzsche says, the noble soul has reverence for itself. Nobility is born out of respect for self. Noble people form values and do not seek the approval of others. They determine what is harmful and what is honorable on their own terms. Nobility is a trait connected with supremacy. Nietzsche describes noble people as honoring the person of power within themselves. They are neither weak nor dependent upon others. Significantly, a noble man is a master of his virtues. Nietzsche writes, to live with tremendous and proud self-possession is to remain master of one's four virtues: courage, insight, sympathy, and solitude. Proud self-possession is another way of saying that no other person should possess or master a person besides the person himself. Therefore, swapping out the words tremendous and proud self-possession for nobility is being faithful to Nietzsche's view of nobility. This clearly shows that a noble person must master the four virtues of courage, insight, sympathy, and solitude. In order to be courageous, insightful, sympathetic, or in a state of solitude, a person must be noble. Courage is the ability to seek after knowledge and reform one's worst qualities into one's best qualities. Gender divisions are sprinkled throughout Nietzsche's writing. He has both positive and negative views of women in his writing. In The Will to Power, Nietzsche says, I treat previous philosophers as contemptible libertines hiding in the cloak of woman truth. Nietzsche belittles past philosophers, but he also connects woman to truth. This is something worth noting, especially when Nietzsche calls honesty our virtue from which we cannot get free. In Beyond Good and Evil, he writes, woman wants to be independent, and to that end she is beginning to enlighten men about woman as such. However, he quickly becomes negative toward the idea of an enlightened woman, even calling it the uglification of Europe. Despite the negative lines that follow Nietzsche's sentence on women beginning to enlighten men, Madame Maria Clark has a positive view of this sentence. She writes in Feminist Interpretations of Nietzsche that his comments on woman as such exhibit his honesty at work more clearly than anything else in Beyond Good and Evil, because nothing else shows us so clearly his conflict between what he thinks and what he knows he has reason to believe. Clark argues that Nietzsche's understanding of woman as truth and woman as an enlightened being starts to shine through. Her approach to Nietzsche's writing, her approach to Nietzsche's wording of this sentence is interesting, but it is not enough to persuade me of Nietzsche's intentions. In a few passages, Nietzsche refers to women positively, but in the majority of his work, he conveys a negative message of women overall. There are multiple feminist interpretations of Nietzsche's writings, but women cannot simply ignore the passages where Nietzsche speaks negatively of the female gender. He refers to women as birds that need to be caged up. If women are not caged up, they will fly away. He talks about women's cooking and how it devalues evolution. If woman had been a thinking creature, she would have learned to cook better by now. Nietzsche is so bold as to say, through bad female cooks, through the entire lack of reason in the kitchen, the development of mankind has been longest retarded and most interfered with. Even today's matters are very little better. Nietzsche is saying that females' poor cooking is affecting men's ability to think and grow intellectually. He often describes women as the weaker sex. While there are some positive connections to females found in Nietzsche's writings, such as women representing truth, the overriding theme in Nietzsche's writing is not a positive one for women. Blindly ignoring these passages does not make them disappear. Nietzsche's resolution to the fact that women are the weaker sex is found in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where he states that women need to masculinize themselves. The only way a woman can be saved from this masculine fate is to find a man who is man enough to redeem the woman in the woman. Females are not capable of enlightening themselves. They are simply too weak and delicate. Woman's first and last profession is to bear strong children. Nietzsche believes a woman's duty is to cook and bear children. Throughout his writing, degrading and objectified views of females are prevalent. In order to understand how a woman could become noble and display the virtue of courage, it is important to first understand Nietzsche's definition of courage. Courage is a virtue that is internal and self-focused. In The Will to Power, Nietzsche describes courage as a person's power to say no. Specifically, he was referring to the ability to say no when it is dangerous to say no. It takes an internal strength to say no when people may have expected a response of yes. The consequence of courage is the achievement of knowledge. Seeking after knowledge is viewed as courageous. A courageous human being is silent, lonely, and resolute. They do not feel the need to surround themselves with the company of others. A courageous human being overcomes what's within themselves, the feelings of emotion and dependence. A courageous human being is cheerful and patient. Courageous humans are pleasant throughout multiple circumstances. A courageous human being has his own festivals, his own working days, and his own periods of mourning. Here, Nietzsche shows that it is courageous to go against the norms of society. It is courageous to be alone in silence, and it is courageous to be cheerful and patient. Having self-determined working days is also seen as courageous, as opposed to allowing another person to regulate the working days. In Beyond Good and Evil, courage is the ability to rebaptize one's worst qualities as one's best qualities. Taking what is most horrifying inside of a person and making it its most glorifying feature is a sign of courage, which is also described as being silent and burying oneself so far down that no one can see what is inside them. Often, Nietzsche connects courage with being hidden and veiled. Going against a master is courageous because thinking for oneself is a form of nobility. All of these definitions of courage have a common thread. They are all internal. Nietzsche never describes courage as the ability to fight in a war, the ability to run into a burning building and save people, or even the ability to face one's fears. Courage for Nietzsche is self-focused and is more of a strength of mind than a physical action. Women, since they are unable to be noble, are also unable to have a strength of mind. A female cannot say no when pushed. A female is impotent to seek and search for knowledge. Even if a woman did find knowledge, she probably wouldn't be able to understand it. She could not overcome what is within herself or rebaptize her worst qualities into her best. She is unable to go against her master, to be cheerful, to be patient, or to overcome what is within her. Nietzsche's philosophy allows only half of humanity to be noble and courageous. In order to use Nietzsche's own understanding of courage and nobility to show how women can be courageous, looking at Genesis chapter 3, the story of Adam and Eve, becomes crucial. Going against a master is courageous. Adam and Eve were made in the image of God. They lived in paradise in the Garden of Eden, in the presence of their Maker. God gave them full reign of the garden except for one tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The temptation of the single tree among the many deemed too much. The serpent, the craftiest creature of all, slithered into the garden and told Eve that if she would eat the fruit of the forbidden tree, her eyes would be opened and she would be like God. Knowing one bite would transform her vision and allow her to gain knowledge and wisdom, she took and ate of this fruit and gave some to Adam to eat as well. He ate the fruit only because it was offered to him, not to improve his knowledge or wisdom. The account of the fall in Genesis is important because Nietzsche himself alludes to this story in Beyond Good and Evil. He writes, "Where the tree of knowledge stands is always paradise. Thus speak the oldest and youngest serpents." This alludes to the scene found in Genesis. The Garden of Eden has one tree of knowledge that Adam and Eve are forbidden to touch. Another place where this image appears is in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where courage is defined as a spiritual and intellectual act of a human possessing the snake's cleverness. Therefore, returning to this biblical narrative is not arbitrary on my part. Rather, it is a story that Nietzsche pulls into his own writing and thinking. Eve, the original woman, seeks after knowledge and goes against her master. In this story, Eve is the noble and courageous character. Adam does not make the choice to go against the master or to seek after knowledge. It is Eve's decision. She is acting nobly by eating the fruit. Adam blindly accepts what Eve has already chosen. The snake's cleverness has tempted Eve to the point of no return. However, the snake did not make the decision for Eve. It was Eve's choice. The disobedience to God is a desire to be more like God, especially the omnipotent and omniscient character God possesses. According to Nietzsche, a good society is described as people who are interested only in what is forbidden. By eating from the forbidden tree, Eve wishes to have her eyes open to the knowledge of good and evil. Therefore, in order for women to be noble, they must seek and go against their they must seek knowledge and go against their masters. I say that to become noble and develop the virtue of courage requires women to embrace the characteristics of Eve. She goes against her master and seeks after wisdom and knowledge. The predominant master of women during Nietzsche's time was the husband. A wife should be independent in the marriage. She should have her own friends, her own schedule, and her own hobbies. She should not simply cook and bear strong children. She should be enlightened. A woman should seek after knowledge, whether through a formal university or an informal book, movie, or class. Nietzsche writes, "It has been his strength and cleverness that had broken open the cage." A woman can break free from the cage she has been placed in through strength and cleverness or knowledge. This is how a woman becomes noble. Allowing the story of Eve to become woman's example of nobility ties in two key factors: going against the master and seeking after knowledge. These two criteria are more tangible now than they were 150 years ago. Women are now allowed to be full-time students at universities and not only pursue bachelor's degrees, but also master's and doctorate degrees. Women can be scientists, lawyers, doctors, and bankers, and even professors at the same colleges that once refused their admission. Society has grown in acceptance and equality of women, but has not reached complete equality between the genders. Inconsistencies throughout Nietzsche's writings point that he may have been questioning his own thoughts of feminine nobility. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche writes that a woman loves a man who commands. However, shortly after this, he gives a possible reason for why women may feel the need to be under a commanding man. Due to the fact that you have never thought much about yourself and have simply accepted that which you have been told ever since your childhood was right. Here, Nietzsche is not pointing a finger at woman as much as society. Society has told woman from a young age she is the weaker sex, and has repeated this message to her. In the same paragraph, Nietzsche points out a woman loves the command of a male, but he also gives an explanation for why women may feel the commands of a male comforting. Nietzsche describes a woman as cheerful, which is a characteristic of a courageous person. He writes that women have the feminine instinct that always sides with virtue. This shows that Nietzsche may believe women are virtuous and courageous. Through these inconsistencies, Nietzsche displays a glimmer of doubt. His thoughts on women are unclear and conflicting at times. The feelings of worthlessness is a trait that plagues all of humanity. The divide between men and women is harmful because it tells half of humanity that they are on the undesirable side. Nietzsche writes, I have no doubt that every noble woman will oppose what Dante and Goethe believed about women. This sentence, and using the term noble woman, shows that Nietzsche vacillates on his view of women. It shows that Nietzsche has not overlooked the possibility that a woman may be able to achieve nobility. This one sentence is interesting, but it is an exception to the overall message Nietzsche sends through his writing. Women can be noble by embracing Eve, going against the master and seeking after knowledge. Allowing nobility in both genders allows people to master the virtue of courage. The divisions among people are unhealthy and only lead to an egocentric society and a defeated group of people. Thank you. So I'd really like to take any questions or thoughts or comments you have on this paper, so please.
What do you think Nietzsche would think of the women's movement?
The women's movement in 1900? Like,
From 1900 to now?
I think he would have more positive thoughts about it than he had in the time that he was growing up in. I think in a lot of his writings, he is struggling between what he really thinks of women. He has some really degrading views of women that he says very black and white. But he also has these little hints of how he thinks women might be able to be noble or may be able to become more virtuous, which I think is showing that he's more open to the idea than some philosophers may have been at the time.
Did he ever marry?
No, he was never married. Just had sisters and a mom. Yes, sir.
Do you think he might have had a change of heart at the end? The irony of the only people taking care of him at the end of his life were his mother and his sister, after all the terrible things he said about women in his books.
I don't know if he had a change of heart. I know that his sisters and his mother really irked him a lot. They tend to annoy him. You can see that in some of his writings that I don't know if his sister and his mom were the best examples of women at the time. I think they kind of fall into this category of women being weak and delicate and not standing up for themselves, which is partially the reason why I think Nietzsche has the philosophy he does. And you can also factor in his dad died at a young age, so his mom was his only caretaker and provider. So I don't know, maybe it's possible. I like to think so.
One gets the feeling he didn't know very many women.
Did you have a question?
It was similar to that.
Okay.
Did his view, in his writings, did his view of women change after his mental breakdown?
I don't know. He seems to vacillate, in one book, in Beyond Good and Evil, he has both positive and negative, and then in this book, Zarathustra, he has both positive and negative. So it seems to be like a reoccurring vacillation throughout his life. There's not in these 4 books we see negative views, and in these 4 books we see positive views. So I think he's kind of unsure about it in general. Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, yes, please.
Well, it seems like he had an awful lot of internal conflict. But,
Yeah.
I wonder how he and Tolstoy or Dostoevsky would have gotten along.
Dostoevsky?
Dostoevsky.
I don't know who that
These
is.
are men who were extremely ignored by their ladies and struggled all their life
Wow.
because of the way they loved their women. And yet, their life kind of, from what I've read anyway, seemed like it went south.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see Nietzsche talk with a lot of different people, or Nietzsche in today's society, what he would think about things. He's an interesting guy.
Can you repeat what was said? We couldn't hear it back here.
Can you repeat what it said? They wanted to hear your question.
I'm sorry?
Can you repeat what you said about?
I just wondered, because of all of his internal conflict, that's probably why he had his mental breakdown. Seemed like an unstable element on the periodic table to me, as far as a human. But I just wonder how he and Tolstoy or Dostoevsky, considering their interaction with their ladies, how the three of them would have gotten along.
I think you're right in the unstableness of him. What's your question?
I'm interested in your interpretation of Eve's actions. Have you gotten any pushback on that from?
Yeah, I have. In Oklahoma, I get a lot of pushback.
I think you're very brave.
Yeah.
Noble.
What?
Yeah, so some of the things people brought up is she was the second one made. If she was made from the rib of Adam, then doesn't that make her weaker from the beginning? Another thing that someone brought up was this idea that when she ate of the fruit, she was eating something that was going to give her knowledge of good and evil. And as a master, you should already have you determine for yourself what is good and what is evil. And I thought that was a really interesting critique, but there was no other way for Adam and Eve to go against their master. Because if we read the biblical narrative, that is the only command God has given to that point, is not to eat from this tree. In Genesis 2, the second story of creation.
Do you think that, because I haven't read as much of Nietzsche as you have, do you think that his critique of the culture, because in some ways it sounds like his critique of women was a critique of the culture, did it carry over into other areas like race, attitudes towards different races, or other marginalized populations? You mentioned the slave and the master, but that's, I think, not thinking of slavery like we often think of it.
I don't notice any comments on other marginalized people in his writing. The master slave he attributes to parent-child and professor-student. He uses it very universally.
Yeah.
There are probably places where it's in there, but I haven't read any of those places.
So when you talk about Eve, I guess there's a question of clarification first. So you were talking about how Eve can fit into Nietzsche's model of courage and nobility, right? Like that's what you were, okay. Which is, so Eve as an example of that, is that a good example for people to follow? Because her actions had bad consequences. So I guess what I'm asking is what do you think of what Eve did? And if she fits into his category of courage, is that a good example to follow in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question, especially for Christians who usually have a negative interpretation of Eve and her actions. I am giving a Nietzschean interpretation of Genesis 3. I'm not giving my interpretation or a biblical interpretation. I am still actually thinking about that story and how it affects us and what my own views on it are. I do believe that the idea of seeking after knowledge is crucial for this idea of being noble, and that's crucial for both men and women, not just women who are trying to be virtuous or courageous and noble, but also men. The idea of going against a master, I probably vacillate on my views of. Depends on the master, maybe. So, does that help answer your question?
Yes. Okay, well, kind of in conjunction to what Daniel said, if in Genesis 3, if Eve is showing nobility by rebelling against the master, God, in this instance, who would be the master for women now in today's culture? Because Nietzsche Nietzsche says that we have killed God. So is it male? Is it just like they're males, their husbands, or is it something greater than just that?
I think that's a great question. I think in the 1800s when Nietzsche was writing, it was very much the husband at that point in time. There was this idea that the woman would stay at home, she would cook and clean and take care of the house and the children, and the male would go to school, would go to work, would bring home the money, and there's this divide in power with that structure. I think that today there's still bits of that, there's hints of that, so maybe it is the husband, but maybe at times it's even females who have this negative, or not this negative, but who almost place themselves underneath men in this world. So, like for example, when women say that there should never be a woman president, these kind of ideas help, I think, place us underneath in that weaker and more delicate category. So it's not just men necessarily.
I was thinking about the Adam and Eve story. If the story had Eve not eating the fruit, how would that would have changed everything.
So like if Adam would have eaten the fruit?
No, or if they didn't.
Oh,
You know,
did
then
they?
we'd be then the story would say we should have remained passive. Everybody should remain passive, never go after knowledge, never grow, never change. Whereas the reason there's that story is it shows we need to take charge of our own destiny. To me.
Interesting.
I would wonder what you would think Nietzsche would think of life in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no nobility in a garden of paradise
Where you're taking care of all.
where you're taking care of all.
Yeah, that's
Adam
really
or Eve.
interesting. I
We
think
wouldn't
that,
have ever grown, right?
well,
I mean, if you don't step out there and take charge of your own
Yeah.
destiny, you don't grow.
is there ways to learn though without eating of the fruit? Or are there ways to continue to show virtues without,
But the fruit is named bad
yeah.
by the other side, not by us.
Well,
The knowledge,
That's right.
I mean, knowledge of good and evil, if the master doesn't want you to know that, like the master didn't want the slaves to learn how to read, so forth, so they wouldn't be smart.
yeah.
I mean, isn't that the same, is that not fit into that to me?
You don't know how you learn if you don't talk about it.
I think we're looking at it from a human standpoint. There's a difference between a master and slave relationship and a God, an individual standpoint. It's not like I told you not to eat off the tree. I'd expect you to go eat off of it. But if the person or entity that has provided all this for you tells you not to do it, and you do it, I don't think that's an act of rebellion. I think it's an act of stupidity.
Yes, sir.
My wife Ina was terribly shocked when she saw women with bound feet, the first woman she'd seen. The current issue of Smithsonian has dealt with that, and while to a Westerner it seems that the society, despite the emphasis on morality of Confucius and even the people that didn't agree with Confucius, their view consistently for 1,000 years has been that women gain status from being beautiful, that was considered beautiful, that they could do something like ballet because of the shoes, that they really showed they were of higher class, it was a class thing, and the men felt that, but the women did too. Now, how does that fit with some of the things that we have been talking about here now? Seems like that's a little different aspect.
So you're talking about women going through,
Well, they're
painful
getting,
experiences.
understand, they are getting a better shake. In fact, the last people are dying. But the question is, why did it last so long? And another historical question is, are they getting some sense, even Nietzschean sense? It'd be better to be ambivalent to have that practice. And I wonder if Westernization, I don't know, if Westernization hasn't helped them, and Marxism, I don't know how it took it, but I doubt if they thought much of any of these things, but then I really don't understand. It's complex.
It is very complex.
All this has made me think Nietzsche's idea of nobility is very much in line with the Confucian idea of nobility. I mean, all of the things that you talked about are in the Analects of Confucius. And nobility is the highest level for a Confucian man. And they also feel the very same thing about women. I don't know. I mean, I think it would be interesting for you to look at it.
I will. That is
Because I made that note when we were talking.
I'll look into Confucianism.
Did you come across anything in his writing? I don't know if I haven't read. It's been a long time. That or letters or anything like that. Did he ever talk about women in political leadership? I mean, that was not unknown in his time.
I haven't read anything about his views of women in political leadership. I don't know if he has anything written on that.
I'm not sure it would have even been
Topic.
possible to conceive of that while he was writing.
But it's interesting, I think in his definition of nobility, a working class person could never be noble. Because they couldn't set their own time and hours and
Yeah.
all that stuff. So, I mean, right there, you've got an elitist.
Yeah, that's what I said. I think he had an attitude toward marginalized populations.
I mean, that wasn't even talked about.
Yeah,
The
the
working class.
setting your own working days and days of mourning and festivals. We very much follow a calendar, especially in our society. Work from 8 to 5. We have a big spring break, a big Christmas break, Thanksgiving break. So those are things that
Some
we...
people have that.
Yeah, that's true. Some people, and college students do. So, Carly?
You mentioned several times that Nietzsche said that women should be like birds in a cage. And in today's society, in the media, women are shown like in this very narrow gap. Would you consider that some sort of caging? That a woman should only be this, like this slim-figured girl with her beauty?
Yeah. I do think that is some sort of cage, and that cage probably isn't just put on to women by men, but it's also probably a standard and idea that women try to uphold. I know that I've tried to uphold that idea of beauty and being, very skinny and having like pretty hair and these crazy things that you see in all these magazine ads or on TV ads. So that's a cage that I would agree that we're in, and we're either having to break out of or work through.
What do you think Nietzsche would think?
Yeah, I think that Nietzsche would say that we're not thinking for ourselves as much as we could in those situations, that we're blindly following what people are expecting from women, or we're blindly following what the producers or advertisers or people who are taking these pictures and putting these ads out are wanting from women, and they're not asking questions or standing up for a different idea. Stephen.
So, would you say then that there is indeed a master-slave relationship nowadays with women, and the masters may not be their husbands or their spouses, but may indeed be the media? Because women are always looking towards the media, and they think, I have to look like Scarlett Johansson or Jennifer Aniston, whoever, and they think that that's how the ideal woman looks. So do you think that that is indeed a master-slave relationship, and that you're still bound by that?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Stephen and Carlene, both of these ideas. I've been thinking of master-slave and this idea of a person or a being, but I haven't thought of it in that broad term of media. I think it definitely could be that media is the master and we are the slaves to follow it, but we are also in the media. So there's this weird connection with the media and us being master-slave, because at the same time that we are the master, we could be the slave. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
At the same time that we're in this ad, we could also be slaving to be like that ad. If you're a model or some, yeah. Any other questions? Well, I thank you for your time, and if you guys ever want to talk to me about Nietzsche, I have a lot of passion for him and really enjoy talking about his thoughts and his theories. So I appreciate you being here, and thank you for your time.